If you've ever heard somebody saying that static stretching is not good for you, or that they've injured themselves after stretching or as a result of stretching, they're probably stretching wrong. To be honest, almost everyone makes one of these stretching mistakes because at one point or another, people thought this was what you were supposed to do. So in today's video, which is the third in the stretching guide series, we're talking about the 5 most common stretching mistakes that people make and what you should do instead. If you are even a little bit doubtful of whether or not you may be stretching a little bit incorrectly, I definitely recommend that you watch this video. Hi, I'm Catherine, the founder and principal therapist at Layton Sports Massage. In this channel, I share information about how the body works and simple self-care tips so that you can live and enjoy your favorite activities as close to pain-free as possible. So let's talk about these mistakes. Number 1, stretching before you exercise. This is a big one, and there are a lot of people who still do it. And it's because we all grew up stretching before we exercised. I played football, or soccer as we call it in the US, from about 8 to about 16 on a recreational league. And every single time we would stretch as the first thing that we did. So if you grow up being taught that stretching is supposed to be done before you exercise, it can feel a little bit confusing. Here's the thing. Some people say that you should do dynamic stretching before you exercise or warm up. And I agree with this, but I don't like to call it dynamic stretching because I feel like that's confusing. So what I'm talking about is static stretching, which is when you put your muscle in a lengthened position and hold it for, 30 to 60 seconds. Dynamic stretching is basically moving through range of movement. It might be arm circles, it might be waving your hands over your head, it might be just kind of doing twists. Dynamic stretching is waking up your muscles, and I like to call that an active warm-up, and I think there are other people who do as well. But static stretching should never be done before you exercise. There is one exception to that, and that is that if you are so tight that you're genuinely afraid that you will have a cramp or a spasm when you're training, you can static stretch that muscle specifically, but only after you've warmed up. Because you might find that if you warm up, then that potential spasm goes away. And if you are having that, where your muscles feel so tight before you train that you can't train unless you stretch them, that just means that you're not stretching or getting massage enough between sessions. So after you train, you should be stretching, not right before. This is partly because your muscles are cold. They're not ready to be stretched, so you're not going to get the same amount of benefit. But also, there is a lot of research that indicates that static stretching decreases muscle function. So you actually get less power and a slower response time if you stretch before you train, and increases your chance for injury, which, if you think about it, makes total sense. Massage is just like stretching. It relaxes your muscles. And we never say to exercise right after you have a massage. It doesn't make sense. We relax your muscles. You don't then go and exercise them. So why would you stretch? Relax your muscles and then go exercise them. I will try to link in the comments below a couple of the research links that show what they found about how stretching can be detrimental to your performance when you're training. But this is the biggest mistake. Don't stretch before you exercise. Mistake number 2, stretching too hard, or also known as what I call overstretching. For some people, overstretching means stretching too much. I say stretching too hard. So Too many people think that stretching is a competition. Like, I'm going to touch my face to my knee if it kills me. I'm going to get my leg next to my head if it kills me. I'm going to get my arm against the wall no matter what. Congratulations, you're torturing your muscles. In part 2, when we talked about the 5 steps to stretching perfection, we talked about how you have a stretch reflex. And so when you go into a stretch, your muscle initially contracts against you to try to protect itself. The harder you stretch, the more the body feels like it has to protect itself against what you're doing. If you think about it, if somebody pushes you really hard, you push back. If somebody pulls on you really hard, you pull back, right? You don't just follow them. It may feel hard, but if you want to get the benefit from stretching, you have to leave your ego at the door. You should not be stretching until you can't stretch anymore, until you're holding your breath and straining. That feeling that you might think is stretching is not stretching. It's straining your muscle. It's your muscle fighting you. When you stretch, you should stop at the first sign of resistance. This may not even be a stretch feeling. It may be a feeling like a pull, or you might just feel like you have to work a little bit harder to get into the same position to get any further. When you stretch this way, when you stretch too hard, it's very likely that the entire time you're stretching, your muscle is tensing against what you're doing to try to protect itself, to try and avoid tearing or small muscle strains. This will lead to tighter muscles, or it can lead to muscle damage and inflammation. I honestly think that when people say that stretching is not good for you, this is one of the things that they're thinking of, because if you stretch as far as you can, you probably will damage your muscles and get tighter muscles, which will actually reduce your flexibility. I cannot stress this enough. The number of times people come in and they're stretching 30 minutes at a time, but they're stretching so hard and their muscles just get tighter and tighter. And the moment they stop overstretching, the moment their stretching becomes 1,000% more effective. So mistake number 2, do not overstretch. Mistake number 3, only stretching where you feel tight. Now, if you have watched any of my other videos, you know that if a muscle is tight, it's because there's an issue in the whole system. So if you're stretching one muscle that feels tight, you are not addressing the imbalance. Usually if a muscle feels tight, the opposite muscle is tight and pulling on it, but you might not feel it. Or you may have an activation issue. So the muscle that's tight is activating more because the muscle that should be activating isn't activating enough. Now, our body has a way of making us listen to it. So if we, for example, let's say your hamstrings are tight. Maybe your hamstrings are tight because your quads are tight. Maybe your hamstrings are tight because your glutes aren't activating. If you just keep stretching your hamstrings over and over and over again, eventually your body's going to find a way to make you listen to address other things. So always be thinking, why is this muscle tight? And am I addressing the underlying cause? So for example, if your hamstrings are tight because your quads are tight, stretch your quads first. If your hamstrings are tight because your glutes aren't active, make sure you assess your glutes and incorporate activation exercises. Now, this is where we love to help you because we look at the whole body. So if you come for a session or if you have a video session with us, we look at your posture, we look at your movements, and we look at what is involved in the whole problem, not just where you feel the problem. If you only stretch where it's tight, you'll probably end up with an injury, partly because you're never addressing the underlying cause of the problem, and partly because eventually your body's just going to stop cooperating with you. So here's a fun thing to try, like an experiment. The next time you feel like you need to stretch a specific muscle because you feel like that specific muscle is tight, identify the opposite muscle first and stretch that muscle. And then retest and see if the muscle that you thought was tight still feels tight. You might notice, you may be surprised to notice actually that the muscle that you thought you needed to stretch actually feels better when you release the opposite thing to what you thought you needed to stretch. Number 4, stretching your joint instead of your muscle. Now, this is a really, really important one, especially if you have any kind of hypermobility. So around a joint is tissue, is tissue called ligaments. Now, ligaments attach across the joint, and their job is to help stabilize the joint. So it will prevent a certain amount of movement in any direction, right? So for example, we know our knees are not supposed to bend past straight. Same thing with our elbows. Our hips and our shoulders have a certain range of movement that's considered healthy or ideal. Now, what some people will do is they'll put themselves in positions where they're not focusing their stretch on the muscle, but actually they're pulling on the joint, which can be very, I don't want to say dangerous, because it's not like you're going to explode yourself or something, but it puts a strain on those ligaments and it can compromise the stability of the joint. And I see it a lot, especially with shoulders. So people will be like doing a chest stretch, but their shoulder's going to be out like this. So they're really pulling on their shoulder. Or when people do a tricep stretch and they like kind of let their shoulder come out of the joint, not only is it not good for your joints to stretch the ligaments, to stretch the joint instead of focusing on the muscle, but also you get a worse stretch. So for example, if you lock out your knees and you can hyperextend your knees so they go a little bit past straight, you'll actually notice that you're stretching your hamstrings less than if you soften them a little bit. So when you are stretching, make sure first that your joints are safe and then do gentle stretching. Now, I know you might be wondering, how do I know if I'm stretching my joint? I would say, first of all, just look at yourself in the mirror and see where things are supposed to be. See where things are naturally. And then do a stretch and notice if you like jut your hip out or jut your shoulder out to accommodate the stretch. That's an indication. Also, don't let your elbows and knees go past straight. Always keep a soft bend in them. If you have any sort of hypermobility, I definitely recommend that you see someone in person, because people who have hypermobility have a history of using the extra mobility they have in their flexibility. So you may need some help to retrain yourself on that. When you start being mindful of your joint positioning, especially if you're hypermobile, you may realize that you're a lot less flexible than you thought you were, but that's a good thing, because instead of pulling your joints around, now you'll actually be able to relax and lengthen your muscle tissue. Mistake number 5, the last mistake in our list: bouncing when you stretch. Now, this is another one that I was told to do when I was younger. And then I read an article that said that it looks like bouncing actually creates micro tears. Now, regardless of whether that is true, and honestly, I totally believe that's possible, when we're stretching, we're trying to apply a gentle pull to get our nervous system to relax the contraction in our muscles and potentially release some of the tension in our fascia. Not the nervous system, but like that also at the same time, hopefully our fascia releases a little bit. Now, every time we change or move, our nervous system has to go, oh, wait, what's going on, and reassess before it can relax into it. This is why in the clinic, we tend to do a lot of holding releases, because when we're moving, the nervous system is constantly having to process new stimulus. So if you're trying to get your nervous system to relax your muscle, bouncing on that stretch is not going to get that effect, because your nervous system is going to be like, what's going on? What's going on? Why is this keep moving? They won't feel comfortable relaxing, or the nerves won't feel comfortable relaxing, because you're putting that input in. So when you stretch, follow the 5 steps to stretching perfection, which does not include bouncing. And just remember, you might be tearing your muscles when you bounce without realizing it. I might see if I can find that article too. but that was a long time ago, so I'm not sure if I will be able to. Now, I want to know, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. But I want to know, do you do any of these stretching mistakes, or have you done them in the past? And which one have you done? And commit in the comments that you won't do it anymore. If you know anybody who commits any of these stretching mistakes, please share this video with them so they can stop and be kinder to their muscles. And if you have any questions about anything I've said here, definitely let me know. I'm happy to expound in the comments or in another video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.